Well, I'll introduce our speaker to you all. Judy Fambrough-Billingsley holds a Bachelor of Arts degree, a California Lifetime Teaching Credential, and Master's degree in Education Administration. Now residing in Elk Grove, California, she is the mother of 2 successful sons, 2 successful daughter-in-laws, and Nana to 4 grandsons. A member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority and 100 Black women of Sacramento, she finds time to serve her church and community in many ways. Please give a warm virtual welcome to Judy Fambrough-Billingsley.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen and to share, because I'm not going to be just talking at you, but we will be able to have conversation. So what I'm going to do is I will present briefly an overview of my story in my book, Too Brown to Keep, A Search for Love, Forgiveness, and Healing. I'll move into giving tips and lessons learned in regards to genealogy research. I'll end by giving some tips on writing and publishing a book, just in case anyone's interested in doing that as well. And then we'll have the questions and answers and session. If you are like me, I would need to put it in the chat, my question, because if you wait till the end, you may not remember what you wanted to ask. So please do that, and we'll certainly get to all of your questions, okay? Let me do sharing of the screen, and if you want to get your cell phone out and just take a picture of this first, let me hit play first. Here we go, slideshow. It has my information. There we go. And it has my email, my website. I have a Facebook author page, and I also have an Instagram page. So rather than writing it down, I always encourage, because I just take my cell phone and take a picture of it. So let's get started, okay? And again, thank you so much for being here. My story begins with World War II. As all of you know, World War II began in Europe in 1939. The United States, we entered the war in 1941 with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The war ended in 1945. World War II was unique in regards to my situation because it was the first time that anyone paid attention to the children that were left behind. There were 37,000 occupation babies, that's what they called us, throughout Europe. There were 5,000 of us, my sister and I included, who were occupied babies born in Germany. It was the first time that the United States and Germany, 2 countries, saw us as a problem. They're like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do with all of these babies that were left behind? I was born shortly after the war. My mother, this is my German mother, Elsa, and my United States Army father, Earl Lawton, and he was served in the Army. They did not marry. My birth father, Earl, lived on the base, and when he had an opportunity to come to the village where we were, then he would come and visit when he could. This is my mother, Elsa. This is my older sister, Helga. This is me. I was born in 1950, so this is a 1950 picture. The date is on the picture, original one that I have. And this is my sister, Irmgard. My sister, Irmgard, and I share the same father. Earl is our father. Helga had a different father. He was German. All 3 of us, of course, are tied together because we're all from my mom, my birth mother. This is a picture of us in a small village, which is still there to this day. And the village was Bingheim, Germany. And it's about a 45-minute drive, 45 to an hour, depending on traffic, from Frankfurt, Germany. So here we are in our flat. This is a picture of Earl and Elsa that are right behind us here. And we were here, we shared the flat, a one-level flat. It is still there, and I'll talk about it a little later on. I do talk about it extensively and describe it in my book. One afternoon, however, my birth mother, Elsa, had my sister, Irmgard, and I come down to the village church. This church is right, if you stand right in front of our flat and look to the right, you will see the village church about a half block from us, and it's still there to this day. My sister and I, Irmgard and I, were playing with a babysitter who brought us to the church. We were playing here on this very lawn, and right on the curve here, all of a sudden there drove a black Cadillac. It stopped just quick enough for our babysitter to place my sister and I in the back of the Cadillac. The doors were locked and the Cadillac sped off. And we left the village, never to see my birth mother, my sister Helga, my babysitter Hannah Laura, her mother, or any of our friends or playmates ever again. I talk about it and describe the 2-hour drive that my sister and I had with this stranger in the car. It was a very emotional kind of trip. We ended up in St. Joseph Kinderheim in Mannheim, Germany. And this is a picture of what it looks like today. I did, when I talk about me sitting on those steps waiting for somebody to let me in, when I was doing my research, these are the very steps and the door here. The Kinderheim was full of us throughout Europe and throughout Germany. Kinderheim means orphanage. And there were hundreds of us who were kept in this orphanage until we were either adopted or we grew up in there. Again, we were called occupied children. We were biracial. And both Germany and the United States, when I researched in papers and Army documents, they did see us and they called us a big problem. What are we going to do with these babies? And my sister and I were part of that problem for them. Well, what they decided to do, we got labeled brown babies, and some newspaper, I think, began to label us that in Europe, in Germany. We were advertised in the newspapers. We were advertised also throughout Europe on television as well. So this is a picture of me, and this is the actual newspaper. Now, this is a newspaper, it's called the Afro-American Baltimore newspaper. And we were advertised in the United States, and we were advertised throughout Europe. The majority of children were adopted throughout Europe, not just Germany, throughout Europe. But there were about 500 or 600 of us, my sister and I included in that 500 to 600, that were adopted by Americans who lived in the United States. So this is me, Ute Schaub. It's my German name, German birth certificate. And I'm here with my little doll. Peter is here, my sister Irmgard. She was advertised. We were advertised separately, but when I talk about how we lived in the Kinderheim and the emotional piece of my sister and I not wanting to be separated and the things that happened, I was truly blessed that my sister Irmgard did a lot of things she did that really caused us to be able to be adopted together and brought to the United States. I'll always be grateful to her for that. We spent time in the Kinderheim, just like all the thousands of other biracial children. Those of us that were adopted by folks in the United States, couples in the United States, they had to do all of the paperwork. It was in German, had to be transcribed into English, of course. This is a picture of me and Sister Melba. And after I did all my research, I found the name of the ticket guy who worked for Scandinavian Airlines. This is Scandinavian Airlines. We are in Germany, in Frankfurt. We are fixing to get onto the plane to board to America, to the United States. And all of us, the 5 of us, will be placed on the plane, handed over to a stewardess on the plane. We flew to New York over the Statue of Liberty, and we landed there. And there, for the very first time, we laid eyes on the couple that would be our parents, and they, for the first time, laid eyes on us. So it was a very long distance kind of relationship in regards to preparing us to come to the United States. So I described the clothes and things that we had and all the people that were involved. It was a big project in Germany through the Kinderheims and through the Americas in order to get us adopted and situated. My sister and I, just like the rest, this is Juanita, I've met her. This is Joe, her brother, and Peter. We left the only country that we knew. Out of all of us, I spoke the least amount of German, but everyone else was fluent in German, including my sister. We left a country that we knew. We were flying into a foreign country, a foreign environment, a foreign language. And so it was pretty traumatic for all of us in the beginning. I do know firsthand how important it is to be adopted by parents who bring love and stability to a child that's been abandoned. And I was blessed. Some people, if you read their books or they talk about their life, hasn't been as good. And I feel truly blessed that Joe and Marie Fambrough, they lived in Bakersfield, and that's where we flew from New York into Bakersfield. My mom gave us the basic foundation of Christian values, and my dad was a very successful entrepreneur. And so he gave us those, instilled in us to be hard workers. He never finished the 8th grade, so he also really instilled in us to get an education, to be strong, independent, hardworking, and Christian women. There are 2 of us, and I say now a third because later on, many, many years later, when I was 15 years old, my parents did adopt another girl. So there are actually 3 of us in the family. But here we're talking about my story, and that is with my sister Imgard and I. And so I was blessed to be adopted by Joe and Marie Fambrough and grow up in Bakersfield. They say that abandonment is a wound that never heals. I say only that an abandoned child never forgets. And when I saw this quote, I had to put it in my presentation because it so resonates with me and so many of us who were given up for adoption. Because even though I had the best of parents, I could not let go of that internal drive that said to me, you have got to find your birth parents, to meet them at least once. I wasn't looking for a relationship, but to meet them at least once. There were always questions in my mind about, did my birth mother love me? Who do I look like? Whose personality do I have? And that was really important to me. And the basic question that all of us have as human beings is to answer the question, who am I? And I was blessed to, as I became an adult in my mid-20s, I think I was about 27, my daddy, my adopted father, gave me a shoebox. And this is not the shoebox, I wish I had it, the original one, but this is similar to what he gave me. We did not have photos in it, but he gave me a shoebox full of my adoption papers, my birth certificates. They were in German, transcribed in English. And I knew when he handed me that box, because I had been asking him for information for years. And when he handed me that box, that was the beginning for me of knowing and going to the odyssey of finding out and answering that question, who am I? For people who are raised with their parents, who am I is a question that is automatically answered. Because your parents, you meet your grandparents oftentimes, their pictures on the wall, their family reunions, your parents talk about relatives, and therefore you get that answer through being a little toddler on up, even through adulthood, as long as you are within the family. But for me, I never saw a baby picture of myself until I was 42 years old. Yes, I know I was a baby, but to have never seen pictures of me, and I describe that feeling of how I got those baby pictures and the feeling I had when I saw myself as a baby. And I know that sounds funny to you, but for me, it was pretty awesome to know I was a baby at one time. So this shoebox helped me to move forward, to answer that question, who am I? And to do my genealogy research. So through those papers, I discovered that I certainly did not know German. And even though they had transcribed those papers, one of the things that I did not know is how to write German, read German, even speak German. So my birth father, Earl, was the easiest one for me to find because his last known address was in New Jersey. The military keeps great records, as you know, you folks that do genealogy research. And so he was on the top of my list. My goal, however, sorry, gentlemen, but it was my birth mother. That is really who I wanted to find. That's who I wanted to answer questions. But my birth father was a vehicle to getting to her. I called him. In the book, it talks about how I called, I found him, and it also talks about how he was so instrumental. He still spoke German. He is the one that helped me to get in contact with Hannah Laura. Hannah Laura here is the daughter of my babysitter in Binghamton, the village where I was grown. She still lives, even to this day, in the village where I was for some years until my birth mother gave us up. Hannah Laura was a teenager when I lived there, and she helped her mother babysit me. This is her front door. And if you walked out of Hannah Laura's front door and walked across the street, you would be at my flat. So that's how close we were to Hannah Laura and her family. This is Hannah Laura's husband, Jacob. I dearly love him as well. I go to Germany every other year now, and although he doesn't speak English for some reason, and I don't speak German, for some reason he and I can communicate, and we have tea and coffee and all of the things, and they are all have been a part and still are a part of my life now. I discovered a lot about my birth mother, Elsa, and was glad that I also discovered that my grandmother, who is Elsa's mother, her name is Liba. She was born in Poland. She's an Ashkenazi Jew, full-blooded, which means, of course, that Elsa is half Jewish. And of course, during World War II, I talk about what happened in regards to Liebe and her dying in the German Nazi concentration camp. Also through my research, and when I talk about my research, please know this was a lifetime of research. So I'm putting in a capsule here, but please know this was over some years, many years, that I did this research and discovery. The family legacy that I saw was that I eventually discovered that there were 6 of us. What we all have in common is my birth mother, Elsa. That's why I put her in this picture. During the war, Elsa gave birth to Hans Jorgen. That's his name. And in 1942, I believe it was, that his birth. And she left him in the hospital and walked away. Helga, this is the little girl in the picture. This is my half-sister Helga. Then this is my sister Irmgard. She and I share the same father. And then later on, when Elsa abandoned all 4 of us, she did marry, and she had Reinhard and Jorgen, my 2 brothers. Jorgen's the youngest, so I have everybody in age here. And Reinhard and I, when I visit, we spend a lot of time together. In fact, most of the time together, he and Hannelore and I. He and I have the same personality, and we get along just great. But he was a great resource in sharing information about Elsa and about her background, giving me a copy of her death certificate. He had a lot of information that was wonderful, and I was blessed and am blessed to have him in my life. Jorgen, I do see him, but Reinhard and I are tighter in age and in personality. So we do a lot of talking, also because Reinhard speaks pretty good English now as well. I want to get to the part that happened to me, and that is that I did not, when I was doing my genealogy research and discovery for both my birth parents really first, I had no intentions of writing a book or doing anything. I had decided when I was in 6th grade, that young, that I was going to meet my birth parents at least once. I had made myself that promise. And people that tend to know me and know me well know that I am an extremely focused person. I am very goal-oriented. And my dad, talking about my daddy that raised me, always taught us that life has boulders in the road. And you take a boulder in the road and you look at it and you say, all right, how am I going to get under it? How am I going to get over it? Or how am I going to get around it? Because I am not going to let this boulder in my life stop me from doing what I want to do or need to do. And so that's what my attitude was when I began search. I began search and found both of my birth parents long before the internet came into being. But as I continued on, the internet made it a lot easier. So researching off and on the internet, as all of you know, is really important, especially if you have people that you need information from, then get that before something happens and they're no longer in your life. Organizing yourself, I think, is important. I began with paper, but then when the internet came, I was able to be much better organized through electronic, making folders on my computer and things like that. What's in my book and what I've discovered and wrote about, I verified more than once or twice, especially if it was information that wasn't exactly pleasant or not as complimentary. And some of it wasn't in regards to my birth mother. I wanted to make sure that I was not just taking one or two people's word for it. So that information that I talk about, and I'm very truthful in my book and very transparent, was verified by many, many different people, not in a group setting, but individually, so that they didn't know what others had said to me. Be prepared for the good, the bad, the ugly. And in my instance, I needed to be, because I knew from reading about being adopted and abandonment issues and that emotional piece that I needed to be ready for someone if they wanted to reject me, which did happen through my search. Being prepared to travel. That was one thing I always wanted to do, and I did it, and I'm glad that I did, and that's travel to Germany and meet people in my village. I talk about the first time I went there and how the villagers, the older people, came out and Uta, Uta, Imgard, Imgard, and they hugged us and were jabbering the German, and I knew I was home. I knew I belonged. I knew this was my village, because they verified it for me simply by knowing who I was. I'm a DNA person, and I saw someone who I think put in the chat about DNA, but that's a very personal issue, I do have to say. And so if you're not comfortable with it, that's okay. I did 23andMe and Ancestry.com DNA. However, I had already found my birth parents. I was actually looking to see, is there anybody else and who are relatives other than what I had discovered. Okay. One of the things I wanted to point out was about Google Earth. I use that a lot. I use it in my personal, when I'm traveling and I'm looking for a hotel, I will get the address, I'll Google Earth, and I'll get down in that street, Google Earth, and I'll go around. Is there a McDonald's? Is there, it's a good neighborhood, all of that. So Google Earth is good, not only for your genealogy research, if you have an address and you want to know, is that house still standing there? That's a way of doing that by using Google Earth. But it's also a good way if you're looking for a hotel or looking for a place to stay, to know where you are in regards to wherever you're headed. Okay. There are a lot of sites now. When I began and the internet came into being, there was only Ancestry.com. But gosh, there's sure a lot of them. And what I did do is I did a little research in just saying, okay, what are the focus? What's the focus of these genealogy now internet places that you can go as a person to look? And so Ancestry.com is certainly the oldest one. My heritage, and I'm not going to go through these, you're welcome to take your cell phone and take a picture of it. But I've cued in on some of the Jewish, like Jewish Gen, US Holocaust Library Museum, because I'm trying to find which concentration camp my grandmother died in. And so that's my goal now, to see which one she died in. Okay. But there are a lot of places to go, very extensive records, and a way to research nowadays that from the comfort of your home. There is slave genealogy, and I think it's important, regardless of who you are, because slaves came, well, actually free Africans came in I can't remember now, I taught history, 1690, 1619, something like that, 1620, I think. But anyway, they were free, and then eventually slavery took hold very quickly in the United States. And I know, as all of you know our history, slaves had children by their masters. And so genealogy, slavery genealogy is in some of these sites that I have here that certainly go back for many centuries. One of the problems about African Americans who are tracing their family tree is oftentimes there's no longer, slave records didn't have names. They just had boy and what size or age. And so that's a way, unfortunately, that kind of stops African Americans from going further. There is the Freedmen's Bureau records, and I actually took a online class on a presentation for Freedmen's Bureau records. And gosh, that was really interesting. And then the Library of Congress slave narratives, I did a Zoom, I didn't do the Zoom presentation, I attended it, and they were really interesting. And so they did have names and some even last names for the slave narrative. So it is also a resource, certainly, that all of us can use if it leads us to that place. Again, I want to emphasize that I had no intentions of writing a book. And as I came home from Germany, and I would take my iPad, and as I talked to people at night, I stayed with Hannah Laura in the village. And so I would actually keep an extensive diary of what happened during the day, who I spoke to, what they shared with me. I drove to Mannheim, Germany, spent a day there, actually got inside finally the Kinderheim after a while. But as again, the boulder in the road, I sat on those steps until I got in. So, and I talk about that in my book. But as I began sharing my story and sharing the discovery, my friends, very good friends, said, "You ought to write a book. That's pretty unique." And so I said, well, let me start writing, because I'd already written things in my notes in my diary on my iPad that was full, because when I go to Germany, I'd spend, first it was a week, then I'd spend 2 weeks, then I'd spend 30 days. So I had a lot to write. So when you began writing, I know oftentimes when you look, people will say, oh, you got to be organized. Well, I just began writing incidents that had occurred. And excuse me, and as I began writing and recording, and then I began really expanding on my story, it began to unfold for me. I wasn't a writer. I knew how to write a little bit, but I didn't consider myself an author material. And so there were times when I would Google sample writing. Now that doesn't mean plagiarism. That means, what are some words that somebody might use if they're describing the forest? What are some words they may use in describing the landscape? Because in Bingenheim, Germany, it is a village, and there are cows out there, and plush grass, and an old church. And so how do you describe those things? So samples and just looking at people's writings, it will trigger something for you. Double check your research. I think that's extremely important. And I did that over and over again. Hiring the right people is very important to do. I discovered that just finding somebody on the internet who's going to help you with your book is not good enough. There is a site that I use. I'm writing my next book, and I'm going to use them on that. And that is called Reedsy, Reedsy. I'll put it in the chat after I stop sharing the screen. But Reedsy.com. And I was blessed to find it. I was just exploring around. And what they have is they have freelance, independent writers, authors, people who are experienced. And so it'll also give you, I also do attend free Zoom classes. They give you pointers on writing, tips on publishing. And so I hired a flow editor. I hired an editor. My editor, I dearly love. I'm not going to tell you her name because I don't want you to take her. No, I'm just kidding. Her name is Beth, and she lives in the UK. And she was excellent editor for me. And I had 2 flow editors. I wanted to make sure my book flowed in sequence and all of that. I also hired a book cover designer. and had them. And I also had to, because I self-published, I also had a person in New York who took my book and formatted it to be able to download it on Amazon.com. So here, as I talk about Flow Editor, an editor to format, to download on Amazon is important. And you have to decide as an individual, are you going to self-publish or are you going to hire a publisher? I'm not going to say which one's the best. You have to decide that. For me, I wanted to self-publish. And the reason I wanted to self-publish is because I had a publisher tell me, well, people are afraid of the topic of race. And therefore, when you have your book, Too Brown to Keep, a lot of people aren't going to want to read it because race is such a touchy issue. Well, my book is really not about race. It's about me searching for my birth parents. But I share in the book how I came about with this title. And I didn't want to change it because it hit to the core of my soul. In that when you see the picture of all of us, I'm the only brown-skinned kid in the 6 of us that my birth mother had. And I, due to Hitler and all of the Aryan race and the blue eyes and blonde hair and all of that, that was one, I'm not saying it was all, but that was definitely one reason why a birth mother gave my sister and I up for adoption. So I was in Germany and I had a very emotional experience, a rejection that really hurt me to the core. And I went to bed at Hannah Laura's house, and all of a sudden I jumped up in the middle of the night and I said, the title of my book has got to be Too Brown to Keep. And of course, I didn't go to sleep. I got my iPad out and I typed it in there because I knew if I woke up in the morning, I'd totally forget it. And as I began writing the book and discovering who my birth mother Elsa truly was, and then I realized that through my search, I was searching for love. Did she love me? I was searching for forgiveness and healing. And I told the publisher, I'm not changing my book. I'm not changing the title. I'm not changing the cover. And if there's not one person that reads my book, then they don't. I was truly blessed to write this book because I truly feel at the end when I talk about how in my chapter of love, forgiveness, and healing, how much at peace I am having written my book. I forgive my mother, my birth mother, Elsa. Forgiveness for me is not forgetting. Forgiveness for me is not allowing anyone who has hurt me to take away the joy in my life. I'll never let anyone do that. And so that's the background for my Too Brown to Keep, a search for love, forgiveness, and healing. And so I self-published because I wasn't going to change my book for a publisher. And I'm glad that I didn't because I have a lot of people reading my book. I wanted to leave a legacy. That's another reason I wrote the book. I wanted to leave my legacy in writing for my 2 sons. This is Chris, he's the oldest, and Chad. They are both married and they both have 2 sons each. I couldn't get a granddaughter, so I'll take the boys. And they have a written legacy of their mom. And before I self-published, before I hit the publishing button, I sent a copy to each of them electronically. And I said, you have 2 weeks to read it. I'm publishing it on my birthday, October 1st, 2019 is when I hit the publishing button. And my oldest son stayed up all night and read my book and called me the next morning. And he said, my God, Mom, I didn't know all of this. So I felt really proud. They were proud of me that I wrote it. and I felt proud in leaving a legacy behind to them. This is my grandson, Matt, at his graduation of Willamette University as a master's in business. This is my grandson, Devin, who is at St. Mary's College right now, his sophomore year. And this is my little guy, Cameron. And this is Caden. And so my legacy is for all of these guys. And when they get married and have kids, they'll have my legacy to read and not have to just remember it, but actually read it. And so that's how I ended my story.